Friends, we're in the home stretch heading towards Spider-Man Brand New Day. A Spider-Man who, in this new installment, will show us Peter pushed furthest out of his comfort zone, at his most aggressive. Because after No Way Home, his friends have forgotten him. Aunt May is gone, he has no safety net, no mentor, no one left to remind him that he's also Peter Parker. And not just a mask swinging between two buildings. And in the comics, that's always been extremely dangerous. Because Spider-Man is seen as the funny, bright, reassuring hero, the guy who cracks a joke while stopping a robbery. The only superhero capable of fighting the Sinister Six while complaining about his overdue rent. But Peter Parker has never been just that. In the comics, Spider-Man has already been monstrous. He has already lost control. He has already scared other heroes. He has already hit too hard and loved too hard, suffered too much, and sometimes behind the red and blue costume, something else appeared, something terrifying. And maybe that's what Brand New Day can explore. That moment when Peter is alone, facing what he has always feared the most. Becoming the threat himself. That's why today we're going to dive into the many comics of one of the world's most beloved heroes to uncover his worst moments. The ones that show us why Spider-Man is so iconic and what he fights against every day. So we're entering a special comic spoiler zone. A danger zone. You're with Kevin Buchart, your not always so friendly neighborhood Spider's favorite theorist. Roll the intro. Peter Parker the Spider. Let's start with something obvious. Even though he was bitten by a radioactive spider, Spider-Man is a hero whose power comes from the mutation that followed. Peter Parker was transformed, mutated, and in the comics, Marvel has often decided to play with this idea of transformation. The first time Peter literally becomes monstrous is in the famous Six-Arm Saga in Amazing Spider-Man, issues 100 to 102 in 1971. At that point, Peter can't take it anymore. He's tired of being Spider-Man, tired of lying, disappearing, hurting the people he loves without ever being able to explain why. So, obviously, like any responsible young scientist in the Marvel Universe, he decides to make a formula to get rid of his powers. And in the comics, when a story starts with a scientist saying he has a formula to solve all his problems, that's the moment to make sure his insurance is up to date. The result here is that he doesn't lose his powers, he gains 4 arms. Yes, and this image is fascinating because suddenly everything Peter hides becomes impossible to conceal. Usually, he can take off the mask, put on a shirt, walk into a room, and pretend to be just Peter Parker. But here, no, his body betrays him. His secret is no longer just in his absences, in his lies, in his impossible schedule. His secret is sprouting from his sides, and this story is important because it already tells something essential. His powers aren't just responsibilities, they're also a physical curse, something that can spill over. The most interesting thing is that Peter doesn't become bad. He panics, he suffers, he wants to be normal again, but he remains Peter. And that's the theme of this whole video. Even when his body or mind descends into horror, there's still that human side that tries to do what's right. But Marvel's gonna go even further. Years later, in Spectacular Spider-Man Vol. 2, with the Spider-Queen arc, Peter finds himself facing Adriana Soria, also called the Queen, a former soldier on whom the army experimented during World War II, giving her powers. And here, we reach a new level. The Queen can control people connected to what she calls the insect gene. Biology nerds, calm down. I know, spiders aren't part of the insect family, they're arachnids. But what can you do? Her power works on both insects and arachnids anyway. Anyway, the Queen acts like a queen and infects Peter by kissing him. A virus that causes his spider gene to evolve, making him mutate. And not just a little. Extra eyes, mutations, urges, a body that doesn't really belong to him anymore. And in the end, Peter doesn't just become a slightly creepy Spider-Man. He transforms into a real giant spider. In this form, he dies before being reborn from the carcass of this giant spider with enhanced abilities. A new man, a new birth, and this boundary in Peter between man and beast is also a central question in the other, evolve or die. A comic that, as you know, will be the main inspiration for Brand New Day, because even though I know many of you are waiting to see Man-Spider, the studio seems to have made its decision. There's no way Zendaya's perfect husband is going to scare children. No. In the other, Peter finds out that he's sick. His powers start malfunctioning, but no one really understands what's happening to him. Even Marvel's greatest minds are stumped. And when Reed Richards, Tony Stark, T'Challa, or even Doctor Strange look at you like you're an unsolvable problem, you know things are pretty bad. Strange even goes so far as to tell him that he's simply going to die. So he decides to prepare for it and make the most of the time he has left with his loved ones. But that was before Morlun. Morlun is one of Peter's worst enemies, a member of the Inheritors family. He doesn't see Spider-Man as a rival, but simply as prey to devour. He doesn't want to prove he's stronger than others or build a giant ray above an atom. No, Morlun wants to devour Spider-Man's essence, and the problem is, since Spider-Man is pretty weak, he gets slaughtered. He beats him up in a way you rarely see in Spider-Man, breaking him physically and inflicting horrible injuries on him, even tearing out an eye, leaving him completely disfigured. Peter ends up in the hospital, on the verge of death, and when Morlun comes to finish the job, Mary Jane tries to intervene. Morlun hurts her, and then something wakes up inside Peter. Not the hero, not the boy who cracks jokes, no. The fun is over, make way for the spider, for the other self. Peter gets up in an almost animalistic state. He has developed fangs, organic stingers, and he attacks Morlun with a primitive violence. This isn't a choreographed fight. This isn't a little heroic victory with a punchline. This is Peter, for a few moments, ceasing to be human. Morlun can't do anything against him and disappears. Then Peter dies in MJ's arms, or rather, he is naked. His body, placed in the morgue of the Avengers Tower, is found split open and empty. Peter is then under a bridge, in a cocoon, going through a metamorphosis. After an exchange in his mind with a giant spider and a sort of man-spider, he accepts this part of himself, the arachnid. And symbolically, that's huge. Because this story doesn't just say Spider-Man gained new powers, it says Peter had to let a certain idea of himself die to accept who he truly is. And that's exactly where Brand New Day can get exciting. Because if the movie shows us a Peter who is alone, forgotten, isolated, and on top of that, facing a physical transformation, the real question isn't whether he'll have organic webs or even claws. The real question is, what is left of Peter Parker when the whole world has forgotten Peter Parker? Because it's all well and good to be Spider-Man. When Aunt May is there to remind you who you are, when MJ is there to prove to you that you deserve to be loved, or when Ned is there during all the tough times. But when all that disappears, when all that's left is the mask, the powers, and the loneliness, is Peter still really Peter? That's why Spider-Man's mutations aren't just visual gimmicks. They speak to his identity. Even Savage Spider-Man, which might seem like a completely crazy miniseries, and let's be honest, it kind of is, tells that same story. In this 5-issue miniseries, Peter is transformed into a wild creature because of a serum that was injected into him. More spider-like, more instinctive, almost reduced to an animal, he ends up on an island in a survival setting with Baron Zemo in the mix. And here, Spider-Man is no longer the urban hero swinging between buildings. He's torn away from New York, from the things that ground him, his sense of humor, and his natural environment. And he's placed in a hostile setting, pushing his body towards something monstrous. And yet, even there's still a part of Peter. For example, he refuses to kill. And later, when a group of supremacists decides to carry out an experiment that will kill a large part of the population of Memphis, Spidey is there to stop them because it's in him. He is a hero. And maybe that's the most fascinating thing. You can turn Spider-Man into a creature, a predator, a biological nightmare, but there's always something in him that wants to protect. And that's exactly what leads us to the black suit, Spider-Man in black. We know fans love to see Peter suffer. Yeah, it's weird, but that's what led the writers to constantly wreck his marriage, his relationships, and basically his whole life. Peter always has to hit rock bottom, which sometimes, on rare occasions, leads him to stop protecting and start punishing, because sometimes the monster doesn't need a mutation. Sometimes all it takes is grief. We all know the black suit. Visually, it's among the most perfect comic book designs, simple, elegant, and menacing. This suit says, I'm not here to talk. You have 2 seconds to run. But in Back in Black, after Civil War, this suit takes on a much darker meaning. Peter has revealed his identity to the world. Obviously, in Peter Parker's life, as soon as he makes a decision that could vaguely bring him a bit of peace, the Marvel Universe shows up with a huge baseball bat. After this revelation, all his enemies want to hurt him, and a sniper targets his family. But Aunt May is hit and she's between life and death, so Peter puts on the black suit again. They shouldn't have messed with Aunt May. But here, be careful, it's not the symbiote version of the suit. It's not Venom whispering in his head and making him aggressive, it's just Peter in a silent rage, and maybe that's the most worrying part. Because often, when a hero becomes violent, we look for an excuse. He was possessed, he was manipulated. It's an alternate version. It was just an ordinary Tuesday at Marvel. Here, no, Peter is clear-headed. He's angry, he's methodical, and he decides that the rules have changed. He hunts down those responsible. He interrogates criminals without his usual compassion. He no longer tries to reassure anyone, and when he gets to the Kingpin, who is obviously behind all this, he makes him understand a truth that a lot of people forget. Spider-Man holds back all the time. When he hits a thief, he controls his strength. When he throws someone against a wall, it's calculated. And when he jokes, it's not because he's harmless, but to distance himself from what he could become. And in front of the Kingpin, that barrier almost disappears. And Wilson Fisk, who is still one of the most intimidating monsters in Marvel, ends up totally humiliated like a child. Because the Kingpin is a nightmare for Daredevil, the gangs, and New York. But an angry Spider-Man is a whole different category. He's faster, stronger, more agile. And above all, he no longer wants to pretend that this fight is balanced. This moment is fundamental because it shows that the real danger of Spider-Man isn't his brute strength. It's the moment when he stops hiding it. And that same darkness returns in the Grim Hunt run. Here, the Kravinoff family wants to resurrect Kraven the Hunter. For that, they want to sacrifice Spider-Man. The only problem is they didn't catch the right one. Because here, the one sacrificed is Kane, a damaged clone of Peter, who takes his place and dies in this ritual. And when Peter finds out about this, something breaks inside him. And as Madame Web says in this run, who was tortured, by the way, just to be clear, I'm talking about the one from the comics, not the one from the movie. You messed up, you made the spider angry. He methodically and coldly neutralizes every member of the family before finding Sacha Kravinoff, the true mastermind behind the ritual. And that's when Peter uses one of his well-known abilities in a, let's say, surprising way, his sticking power. Instead of using it to stick to a wall, he presses his hand against Sasha's face and makes it stick harder until he rips off part of the skin from her face. He literally rips her face open, leaving her severely mutilated. Yes, it's absolutely disgusting. And these moments aren't cool because Spider-Man becomes violent. They're powerful because they show us how much this violence scares him. Peter isn't a hero who doesn't feel rage. He feels it fully. He knows it. It's there all the time, just hiding beneath the surface. And sometimes he fails to contain it. That's what makes some moments really dark. One of the best examples is found in the arc The Death of Jean DeWolff. Jean DeWolff, apparently played by Lisa Colon-Zayas in Brand New Day, is not just a police captain in her comic version. She is one of the few people within the police who trust Spider-Man. She believed in him, considered him a true ally. So, when she is found murdered at home by the mysterious killer known as Sin Eater, Peter suffers a terrible shock. And from that moment on, he's no longer the Spider-Man we know. And once again, the strongest indicator of his switch appears. No more jokes, he becomes cold, brutal, almost obsessed. Every criminal he questions is roughed up, and only one thing is on his mind: finding Jean's murderer and making him pay. But this quest will put him on a collision course with Daredevil. Where Spider-Man thinks only of revenge, Daredevil reminds him that a hero can't become judge and executioner. For Matt Murdock, Sin Eater is a murderer who must be arrested and tried, not executed. The two heroes even end up fighting each other. And Spider-Man hits him with unusual violence, driven by his anger. Daredevil realizes that his friend is about to cross a line he may never come back from. And when Peter finally finds Sin Eater, he throws himself at him and beats him up. For a few moments you can feel it. He's ready to finish it, but fortunately Daredevil steps in and stops him from going all the way. This story reminds us that Spider-Man's greatest battle isn't always against a supervillain. Sometimes his worst enemy is his own anger. Without Daredevil, that day, Peter Parker might have lost much more than a friend. He might have lost what made him Spider-Man. And the same unease showed up in the Clone Saga. In Spectacular Spider-Man issue 226, when Peter accidentally hits Mary Jane during an argument with Ben Reilly. And let's be honest, it's an ugly, painful moment, almost unbearable when you love the hero. And it needs to be treated as such. Okay, let's put ourselves back in context. Peter is in crisis. He no longer knows if he's the original or the clone. His whole identity is collapsing. After a series of tests, he's convinced that Ben Reilly is the real Peter Parker and that he's just a copy. Peter loses his temper and accuses Ben of wanting to steal his life. He tries to strangle him, and MJ, who was pregnant at the time, tries to intervene. But in this explosion of rage and confusion, he pushes her way too hard and hurts her. This moment is tough because it shatters the reassuring image of Peter. It reminds us that he's not immune to his own flaws, that even Marvel's most human hero can become dangerous when he loses control. And ultimately, it's a lesson about the very nature of humanity, that a true monster can exist within anyone. A true lesson about psychology and mental health, especially for the hero, who is expected to be flawless, who is not forgiven for any weakness, and who sometimes goes too far. And that's why, when he no longer holds back, everyone should really be worried, even the other heroes. Spidey versus the world. Spider-Man has this reputation as the little brother of the Marvel superheroes. He cracks jokes, he shows up late, he talks too much, he seems less serious than the Avengers or the X-Men. But sometimes the comics remind us that this is a huge mistake in judgment. One of the best examples is in Secret Wars from 1984. We're on the battle world of that era. The greatest Marvel heroes are gathered. The Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. All these people are thrown into a cosmic war by the Beyonders. And in the middle of the tensions between heroes, Spider-Man catches the X-Men secretly discussing their plan to go it alone. Realizing this, the X-Men want to stop him from telling the Avengers. And then you think, well, Spider-Man facing a team of trained mutants like Wolverine, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Cyclops, Rogue, and Storm. Well, normally that should be complicated, but actually not at all. For a few moments, Spider-Man makes a fool out of them. He dodges, he leaps, he webs them up, he moves way too fast. The X-Men try to stop him, but no one manages to catch him. Even Wolverine admits in his own way that Spider-Man is way too fast and way too hard to handle. And this scene is absolutely brilliant because it doesn't say that Spider-Man is more powerful than the X-Men overall. Because if Storm decides to turn the room into a weather disaster, or if Rogue touches him, or if Cyclops catches him at an angle, obviously things get complicated. But that's exactly what's so great about it. Spider-Man doesn't win because he's a brute. He wins because he's untouchable. His spider sense, his speed, his agility, his combat intelligence, it all comes together, and he doesn't fight like a tank. He fights like a math problem that insults you while you're trying to solve it. And then, all of a sudden, the wisecracker turns into the guy that even the X-Men can't calm down. And this kind of scene is perfect to understand who Spider-Man really is. He's not always the one who hits the hardest in the room, but he's often the one that nobody can touch. And in a fight, that's a pretty handy quality, like having a built-in GPS to dodge punches. But there are times when Spidey is a bit more direct, like against Hulk, for example, in Amazing Spider-Man number 328. Well, at that moment, Peter temporarily has the cosmic powers of Captain Universe. So let's set the record straight. No, that's not Spider-Man's normal level. No need to argue in the comments with, actually, Hulk would destroy him. Honestly, I'm not even sure about that. Regardless, the scene is still legendary. Spider-Man faces off against the Grey Hulk in the ruins of their fight from the day before. Two kids who came there to secretly smoke decide to help Spider-Man. Seeing them in danger, Spidey simply stops holding back. He hits Hulk so hard that he sends him into orbit. Yes, into orbit. At this point, it's not even a punch anymore, it's a space program. But what makes the scene interesting isn't just the feat of smashing Hulk, it's what comes after. Peter realizes that he might have sent Hulk a bit too far. He understands that if he turns back into Bruce Banner in space, he could die, so he goes to get him back. And that's Spider-Man summed up in one scene. He's capable of an absolutely absurd feat, even with completely over-the-top powers. But his first reaction after hitting too hard is guilt. Not pride, not triumph, not look at me, I just turned Hulk into a SpaceX rocket. No, it's a crisis of conscience. In the end, didn't I go a bit too far? In fact, right after that, it leads him to tell Ang that he doesn't want his powers anymore because they're way too dangerous for others. Another fight with Hulk that I love is in Spider-Man Unlimited number 11. Here, the concept is much funnier. We're not just following an epic duel in the middle of the street. We see some guys in a bar watching Spider-Man fight Hulk on TV and placing bets. Personally, I think the idea is absolutely amazing. In the Marvel universe, people are so used to seeing mass extinction level disasters that there are guys watching Hulk destroy a neighborhood and saying, hey, I put $50 on the guy in the red pajamas. At the end of this story, we find out that the one who started this betting idea and who won by guessing all of Spider-Man's moves and his victory over Hulk was actually Electro in civilian clothes. After being beaten by Spider-Man so often, he knows exactly what Spider-Man's capable of. And he's not just going to hope for his defeat. No, he's going to bet on him to make a few bucks. But above all, this story confirms something fundamental. In a fight, Spidey uses the environment, dodging, speed, and anticipation. He turns the fight into a puzzle, and that's his real power. Spider-Man is a genius who pretends to be a clown. He talks too much, he teases, he improvises. But behind it all, his brain is working at an incredible speed. He has a predator's instincts and a scientist's mind, which we saw in No Way Home against Strange. Damn. That's why he can stand up to opponents who should theoretically crush him. And that's why his smartest enemies always end up realizing that there are two Spider-Men. There's the one who cracks jokes, and there's the one who holds back so the first one can keep existing. That's exactly what Superior Spider-Man shows, by taking Peter out of the equation. At the end of Amazing Spider-Man issue 700, Dr. Octopus manages to swap his mind with Peter's. Basically, Peter ends up in Otto Octavius's body and Otto in Peter's body. But here, Peter doesn't manage to survive in Otto's body. And Otto ends up becoming Spider-Man for good. That's when he decides to become a better Spider-Man, a superior Spider-Man. And the most disturbing thing is that, at first, well, it works. He's right, he is better. Otto is organized, brutal, and strategic. He sets up drones, monitors the city, and optimizes crime fighting. Where Peter improvises with 3 webs, a headache, and $20 in his account, Otto builds a system. But very quickly, we understand the fundamental difference between the two. Otto uses Spider-Man's powers as a tool for control. Peter sees them as a responsibility. Otto doesn't think about limits first, he thinks about results. He wants to win, dominate, prove that he's the best. And that's where Superior Spider-Man becomes fascinating. Because Otto gradually discovers that Peter wasn't weak, he was showing restraint. When Otto hits an opponent with Peter's body, like when he breaks Scorpion's jaw with a single punch, he realizes that Spider-Man could have done a lot more damage for years. It's just that he doesn't do it because Peter Parker is what holds him back. And that might be the best definition of the character. Peter isn't just Spider-Man. Peter is what keeps Spider-Man from becoming a real weapon. Without him, Spider-Man becomes more efficient. Yes, maybe even more impressive in the short term. But he also becomes much colder, more authoritarian, more unsettling. He becomes the fantasy of someone who thinks that saving people gives him the right to control them. And Peter, he understands that this is not what being a hero is about. Above all, it's about protecting others, especially the people we love. And that's where Spider-Man, Reign, becomes interesting. Even though it's an alternate story, and even though it contains one of the most infamous ideas in the character's entire history, in Reign, we discover an old, broken, withdrawn Peter. New York has become a dark, suffocating authoritarian city, and Mary Jane is dead. Peter carries this guilt like a prison. The revelation surrounding Mary Jane's death is extremely controversial. The idea that exposure to Peter's radioactive fluid caused her death from cancer. Yes, it's just as weird and grim as it sounds. But anyway, remember, Peter has to suffer. Basically, the idea behind all this is that Peter is afraid that even his love can destroy those around him. In Reign, the monster isn't a giant spider, it's not Morlun, it's not the black suit, it's guilt. A Peter who has suffered so much, who has lost so much that he preferred to disappear rather than risk hurting someone again. In the same way, he chose not to reveal anything to MJ at the end of No Way Home, not to keep his promise when he saw the scar on her forehead that he had caused. And that brings us back once again to Brand New Day, because the Peter in the movie is potentially in one of the most dangerous situations we can imagine for him. Not because he's facing a stronger enemy. Not because an invisible villain is threatening the city, not because Hulk, the Punisher, or Scorpion crosses his path. No, it's because he's alone. And Spider-Man alone is almost a paradox. On one hand, that's when he's at his purest. No more Stark Tech, no more safety net, no more people who know his secret, just Peter, his suit, New York, and responsibility. However, that's when he's most vulnerable, since Peter Parker needs human connection to avoid losing himself behind the mask. Aunt May reminded him why he had to be good, and Mary Jane reminded him that he had the right to be loved. Ned reminded him that he didn't have to be alone. If Brand New Day takes all that away from him, and also adds a physical transformation that he can't control, then the movie can tap into something really powerful. The fear that Spider-Man could become Spider-Man without Peter Parker. And guys, that's where everything we've just talked about makes sense. The Six Arms, the Spider-Queen, the Other, Savage Spider-Man, the Black Suit, Back in Black, Grim Hunt, Daredevil. Who has to stop him? The X-Men who can't even touch him, Hulk sent into orbit. Otto, who proves what Spider-Man becomes without Peter. Reign, which shows a future destroyed by guilt. All these stories tell the same truth. Spider-Man isn't extraordinary because he's nice. He's extraordinary because he could be terrifying. He could be a creature, a predator, a brutal vigilante, a highly efficient instrument of control, or a man so consumed by guilt that he simply gives up on the world. But still. And still, Peter Parker chooses something else. He chooses to save even those who don't deserve it. He chooses to joke so he doesn't become cold. He chooses to get back up even when no one knows he has fallen. And maybe that's the true greatness of Spider-Man. It's not just that great power comes with great responsibility, like a serious phrase engraved on a mug. It's much more real than that. It's a boy who knows he could hurt people, but learns to protect them. He carries a monster inside, but won't let it take over. He could be a nightmare, but chooses to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, even when the neighborhood forgets him. And if Brian Udai understands that, then the movie can really show us a darker Spider-Man without betraying Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man has never been only about light. He's bright because he goes through darkness, and that's why we love him. Well, you get it. This character is more complex than people think. And you, tell me in the comments what you like most about this Spidey. Also subscribe to my buddy Deviant, who helped me a lot with the writing. I'll leave you my video about the real villain of Spider-Man Brand New Day, and I'll see you next week. Same day, same time. In the meantime, don't forget to stay curious. That's the secret to being happy. Bye.